interconnectedness with climate change and people who believe that we are different as environmentalists and tree huggers. And, you know, it's so hard for people to see the connection that we're all the same people and we all have, you know, the same issues and lives that we're dealing with. So not just in the elements of the maternal situation that we're seeing unfolding here and we're all admiring in the background, but so many other issues as it relates to the manifestos itself and why it is that people as ourselves in this room, this virtual room now, it's important for us to raise our voices because and to help the wider public to make the connections that our leaders have not seemed to be making. Thank you officially, and for those who may not have heard, I'm Ainalyn Swaby, your moderator, and I'm pleased to be representing YPAC, Young People for Climate Action Jamaica, and also GirlsCARE. And before we get into the discussion, I'm going to encourage you all to make a note of the Jamaica Debates email because we want to raise our voices and to elevate our concerns. You can follow Jamaica Debates at Jamaica Debates on social media and email your concerns, your queries to jamaicadebates2020@gmail.com. Now it's all systems go for September 3 general elections. The manifestos are out, the debates have returned, and you know we're so excited-ish about that. But most importantly for us, what has been said on climate matters and on environment matters, protected areas, beach development, climate change, green economy, renewable energy, and more. How were these reflected in the manifestos? Are we happy with the considerations given to these issues? How could attention to these issues and other issues be made more substantive? And what should the approach be to climate-proof development nationally? This is what we want to hash out in this discussion. And I want to welcome our panelists for today. Diana McCauley, Board Chair of the Jamaica Environment Trust. Right, I saw her do a virtual wave there. Dr. Susan Otuakan, Executive Director, Jamaica Conservation and Development Trust. And Mario Christie, Director, Research and Policy Development for Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council. And rounding off our panel, we have Michael Morgan, Media and Communications Director, Caribbean Youth Environment Network, Jamaica, and also a content strategy consultant. I want to say thank you for our panelists for slotting the time. Now I'm going to start with the ladies who I know have been championing this space for a very long time. Reflecting on the previous election promises or manifestos, how do you weigh the current presentations in light of the environment and climate considerations in particular? And I want to start with Diana. Just reminding you to unmute your mic, Diana.
Thanks, Dana. I like your backdrop. I wish I was of YS. You're testing my memory actually about what the previous manifesto said, and I'm not sure that I can really remember that. But I reviewed both of them. The PNP, this current PNP manifesto, I think is a little bit difficult to get an overall view of because it asks you for these areas of interests before you get into it, you know. And so the thing that comes back to you is this abridged version depending on what you have put in as your areas of interest. So that's certainly a new approach. And I've looked at the JLP one, which is, I feel like is much longer, but then that's because I'm looking at the whole thing. So it's difficult for me to say how they have changed. I would say I don't feel they've changed much because I think there's a sort of laundry list of, you know, intentions and promises that I think are just way too ambitious. They're far too long, far too many of them. And then a lot of them are far too general. And the thing that I see that has always been missing about climate change and the environment is a lack of understanding from both political parties that this is a cross-cutting, undercutting, foundational issue. They keep treating it as something separate, you know, so you can put it in its own little heading, when in fact, the change that needs to be made is if we're talking about agricultural policy, we need to know what are the climate implications and environmental implications of agricultural policy. If we're talking about housing policy, we have to include the climate change and environmental issues there. So that I think is the main failing that I've seen in all the years I've been doing this. that still hasn't been addressed. A real understanding that this is not something separate, not something apart, not something you can push to one side, but something that has to sit underneath all the decisions that we make. You have to remember to unmute now.
Yes, no, I was waiting on Dana Lynn, but thanks. Yes, for me, I'm very bad at these things. I'm not following all the details. I think I'm just overwhelmed and a bit tired from the same old things. You know, I think certain words and phrases are bandied about by politicians generally, and I think it all goes back to what Diana has said. There is, even after so many years, a lack of understanding of our environment. We are part of it. We make up the environment. We depend on it. It's like it's something out there separate and apart from us. There's still a lack of understanding about climate change. I mean, yes, we're very concerned about it, but it's still this kind of an add-on thing. And until there has been an effort, particularly at the international level and then coming down to Jamaica through the conventions that we sign, this attempt to integrate and ensure that environment, climate change, and all the related issues are integrated and form a part of all policies, practices, various projects, and so on. But I don't think really that has happened. It's just been written in, and it shows that we don't understand, because we are thinking that taking care of the environment doesn't necessarily bring in cash dollars into the tax kitty. I am thinking that is part of the issue. So even when we do our valuations, economic valuation of natural resources, we get these huge, wonderful figures, how many millions of US dollars the forests are providing, but that's not US millions of dollars in cash. And so it somehow still does not get translated into the fact that we need to integrate taking care of our environment into every industry, and that we might need to make some tough decisions about the types of industries that we as a small island are investing in.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Twalcon. Listening to both ladies who opened, it brings me back to one of the words one of the participants in the previous debate said, or it seems as if our leaders just don't get it as it relates to integrating the considerations. Much of what you said we're going to be exploring throughout this discussion, but I want to move over to the generation that will inherit the climate challenges. Given the current context and factoring the global conversation and Jamaica's designation as a small island developing country, do you get the same sense of urgency being conveyed in the manifestos? And I want to bring in Michael on this question.
On this, okay. Audio good? Audio good?
You're good.
Yes. Hi. Well, first, thanks for organizing this discussion. I think it's very important, especially as we're seeing troubling things in terms of increase in the effects of climate change in, for example, Laura and other storms where we're seeing devastation. I think the urgency, I must say that there's a noticeable change, I would say, and I would give the GLP administration some credit for that noticeable change in youth engagement, as well as some practical things in terms of the styrofoam ban, reducing plastics and stuff like that. I think those are and when they do those things, we must give them credit for it. But I think, as as the panelists before said, a more overarching view of climate change being a part of all means of development that we want to achieve, economic, talking about social welfare. It's in all these industries, and we're not seeing that urgency. It's almost seen like a burden that, okay, we have to tag on this climate change thing, we have to tag on this environment thing, and it's not being appreciated as the ability to, do forward strategic planning that considers the natural environment, which is that will directly impact any plans that you're going to do in the future. So I don't think that there's that urgency in either of the manifestos whatsoever.
Okay, right. And I just want Maria to weigh in quickly on that same question.
Thank you, Denalyn. The short answer is no. Just to underscore everything that everybody has said before, some low-hanging fruits were totally missed as it relates to the environment. Something like a water management strategy, waste management strategies, all of those things are low-hanging fruits that impact the environment that were just not considered any at all. So they missed the ball totally as it relates to how climate change will impact us as a SID.
Okay, all right. And on that note, we're going to follow up as it relates to the waste management strategy, because I did think something caught my eye as it relates to an inclusion within the PNP manifesto, and that's probably what we want to discuss as it relates to how vague and the detail, how satisfied we are with the level of detail with which these manifestos have been presented. So we're going to come to that just a little further down. But one of the things that we want to acknowledge, because it's not all about what isn't there, even though that's critical. Let's talk about anything that you may notice that you'd categorize as a welcome inclusion. Is there anything new, anything overdue, or that we have been looking for, and finally we've seen it made a showing? Is it anything that they got right? Who wants to start? Diana let us know what you think about that.
Well, one of the things in the PNP manifesto that I wouldn't exactly say it's new, but it's very welcome, because there's a statement in there that the boundary for the cockpit country protected area that will be accepted is the boundary that has been put forward by the communities. I don't know if that's the exact language, but that is certainly the spirit of it. And as you all probably know, this has been a disputed, a very contentious issue since the announcement of the cockpit country protected area, which has left out certain parts of cockpit country that the people who live there and work there, and as well as some other environmental and geological implications, feel important areas have been left out. So this commitment in the PNP manifesto is very welcome.
Okay.
The JLP manifesto speaks to focus on the green and blue economies, and this is a kind of sort of vague, almost jargon type of thing that I am tired of seeing, because I want to know what that means. I think it's a way of pushing away these hard decisions. And I'm gonna, when we talk about policies, and we say, oh, we need a waste management policy or a water management policy, I can assure you that all of these necessary policies, I can't think of one that has not been underway for some 10 years, and in some cases 20. So we do try to develop policies, and we do spread them out over decades. And when they finally do get adopted and promulgated, we either ignore them or immediately decide that they have to be revised. So that's the danger of the policy, what I think of as the policy document trap, where the policy document is seen as an end in itself. So not really rejoicing over any commitment policy documents. There's one exception, which is the National Spatial Plan. Now that has been being talked about, oh gosh, I think from the early 90s. But if you surely get a National Spatial Plan where a developer or an investor or an ordinary Jamaican could just go and look at it and say, okay, in this part of Jamaica, only it's agricultural. There'll be no hotels. There'll be no housing. This other part over here is designated for housing. So if I want to look for housing, I need to go and look for it over here. If we could get that done, that would be a very great win. But as I say, we've been talking about it since the mid-90s.
All right. I see someone saying that Jamaica has an implementation problem. Eleanor, just to boost the dynamism of the discussion, feeding some of the comments from Emma, jargon we hide behind terms like the blue economy. Coming back to the panelists, Diana, you mentioned about, definitely the welcome inclusion about mining in the copy country. I'm sure that perhaps Susan would have seen that as well. I looked at it, I saw it, and I was wondering, when you see something on paper, but then you didn't read the fine print, and I'm not sure if they're going to catch us, because when they mentioned about the boundaries, does it need any more specific detail as to what boundaries? Is that something that we should have breathe a sigh of relief over? Is there something that's going to catch us at the end of that? Susan and
I would
Dr.
agree.
Yes.
I would agree that we have a serious implementation problem. I don't know if it's just Jamaica, but it's Jamaica that I know about. I think people have a problem with implementation, but that part of our challenge is not just the environmental sector. And I hate to call us a sector, because going back to what I said initially was that it needs to flow through everything. We need to have environment and care of our environment at the basis of everything, and just look at it as part of the cost of business, and that there's a very high cost later on that you're going to have to pay for, or somebody is going to have to pay for this. And the challenge is that governments are the ones who are to make these decisions on behalf of people. But perhaps because of the way that governments run in these 5-year cycles, or sometimes less, it doesn't seem that people are willing to make the hard decisions. We talk about political will. But really, for our country to move forward, a lot of people talk about Costa Rica as a good example of good, strong environmental management. But if you've ever been to Costa Rica on a study visit, you will find out that it was a very high-level political decision, not based on one party or the other. It was a joint decision as an approach for the country. And I think we have to get to that point.
Definitely agree with you. After all, it's one Jamaica at the end of it. Michael, Mario, your thoughts on anything as youth, or even in your particular area of interest? Is there anything that jumped out to you as a welcome inclusion, or something that you were expecting to see and you saw it in the manifestos?
Definitely, for me, with the JLP manifesto on education, they definitely spoke about the inclusion of distance learning as a part of the regular schooling experience going forward, and that is very welcomed, especially with all the heightened anxiety now around schools reopening, as the number of cases are going up again. So I was very happy to see that. Not so much for the PNP, because when I was reading their manifesto, I actually had to seek some clarification on the Education Act, because with the push to reopen school physically, I was wondering whether or not we had the scope legally to just have classes online, but then we do, because we just mandate that the number of contact hours should be, we mandate a minimum number of hours. So we definitely do have the scope to do that mixed method kind of lesson delivery. And I was happy to see that in the JLP's manifesto. It has very positive implications for us going forward. All
right. Michael, quickly, do you have any thoughts on what you consider welcome inclusion in any of the manifestos?
I mean, having looked at both, I find that, going back, there were a lot of buzzwords used in the green economy, and especially I saw this trend in both manifestos actually, where it was will develop strategies, and as panelists before said, some of these things have been deliberated over a long period of time. There are some things that stuck out to me in terms of, I think this is the JLP manifesto that spoke about air pollution, air quality and pollution, and some aspects that focused on increasing fines. But once again, it's about the follow through and tight enforcement of that. And I don't think that with, as you said, if the political will isn't there in a unified fashion that can look at a multi-administerial plan, then a lot of these things won't be implemented, because what will happen is that they will maybe start the plan, start some parts of implementation, and then due to, you know, the electoral cycle, a new administration comes in, stops a program, rebrands it so that they can get credit, and then nothing ends up being done in the end.
All right. Thanks for that, Michael. Now, I'm going to backtrack on some of the comments that our panelists made previously. Maria, you opened up with, you know, seeing something welcome within the education sector. And I want to ask the panelists in general your opinion on education. There has been a lot of focus on climate awareness building, whether locally or internationally. The discourse is really heavily amped up about mainstreaming climate education. Maybe I missed it. I didn't really see anything specifically speaking about integrating climate consideration in school or anything like that. What are your thoughts, panelists, on how that should have been represented, or whether or not that was reflected in the manifestos? I want to start with Dr. Otuakan. Did you see anything that stood out as it relates to that?
As I said, I didn't read. Well, the problem is that these documents, if you don't search hard, and very hard for them, you can't find complete, you know, they're bits and pieces, very highly branded stuff. With respect to the PNP, yes, it was difficult to actually get something. But the concern that I have, and I think it's important, because sometimes these manifestos traditionally have been, you know, just promises, you know, and some nicely branded document. So regardless of what is said and bandied about, in terms of education, there is a lot in our existing curricula that address the issue of understanding about our environment, how we are connected, the issues with climate change. It's not so much our policies, it goes back to this implementation, that there are a lot of excuses about implementation. Some of it is political, because somebody mentioned, I think it was Michael, about enforcement.
Right.
So the small man, he's not enforced against because, you know, boy, he has to feed his children. And then you're not enforcing against the big man either, because he has whatever political clout. And so people in Jamaica figure we can continue to throw the garbage out of our windows, or just pass by the gully and throw it in. We can continue to light fires here and there, and if it burned down the place, it's just one of those things. We do need to get serious with enforcement, and we do need to really implement these various plans that we put into place. But a lot of time and effort is spent on the planning and not the implementation, and part of it is related to political will and votes and so on.
Right. I wanna ask if anyone else has any comments on that particular question. I mean, I think it's a very what would I say, a time where a lot of emphasis is really being pushed towards youth leadership, youth involvement in climate change, and integrating that with education. Does anybody else have any thoughts around, you know, Diana? Thank you.
Yeah, I think with education, that as Susan says, a lot of education is there, you know, it's in the curriculum, right, and a lot of education has been done. The people I'd like to see educated are the ones in Gordon House. You know, that's where the education needs to happen, and the ones at the PSOJ and the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, you know, that the trade unions. That's really the people that are making decisions on legislation, judges, on enforcement, on, you know, planning decisions, special plan we talked about, on whether we have protected areas, what treaties we sign, what international conventions we sign, what commitments we make. That's where the education needs to take place, because that is where it's lacking to me. I mean, I stood up in front of lots of people and talked about climate change, lots and lots and lots and lots. And there's a moment in a climate change talk where you can kind of see that you're losing them, because you can kind of see that you're telling them there's this enormous geopolitical problem that we here in Jamaica did not cause. that is going to affect us disproportionately, that there's nothing much we can do to head it off from coming here. And you sort of see them looking at you like, what is it you're asking me to do? Me as a girl, me as a fisherman, me as a farmer, you know, this is a bigger problem than me. And this is one of the things that has always occupied my mind about climate change education, that we need to understand what is needed, because it's not just knowledge about, oh, how is this happening? Because, you know, carbon dioxide atmosphere result in these problems, but it's how to change the decision makers, how to change decisions that are made, how to make them understand what a very serious problem this is.
Definitely. I guess perhaps in another discussion, I know some of the advocates in this space, I would have heard them speak on when we speak about climate education in schools. Of course, we do know that there's content there, but not necessarily grounded specifically in the science and the geo subjects, you know, integrating it across mathematics, across social studies. I know Eleanor, who is online, would have shared those recommendations in a previous discourse. So that's something that we also can think about going forward. Diana, you mentioned about, you know, some of these some of the points being too broad, being too vague, and that begs the question: should these manifestos be reflected as being more smart, and what additions can be made? Because we see sections of the manifesto speaking about modernizing the fish sector, promoting, ensuring that all rural farms have access to water. What does that mean? I am a daughter of a struggling farmer who, you know, wants to expand literally, and it's always this issue with irrigation. So when we speak about all farmers, how do the regular person manage their expectations? Say, I will benefit from, you know, am I all farmers? So what are your thoughts, panelists, around, you know, how these manifestos are being structured? Diana, because I pulled from your example, I'm going to pick on you.
Okay. So I think what is missing, right, is, and you ask if these things should be smart, and by smart, I guess everybody knows what you mean: specific, measurable, time-bound, achievable. And actually, that's not what I am looking for, because that is going to be now a 300-page document, and they're already, right? What I am looking for are these underlying structures and approaches that would make widespread difference, right? So I'll give you an example of, for example, the regulatory framework. Susan spoke about enforcement, right? Our environmental laws have giant gaps in them. And you know, you can't really blame, or I don't really blame, a private sector company who is carrying out, you know, activities that are harming the environment or people, but is a subject of a legal permit, right? They will look at you and they will say, here's my permit, my actions are legal. That leads me to think we have to do something about the permitting. You know, maybe the law is not strong enough, maybe the permits are not specific enough, whatever. And I think it is those things we need to look for. A specific example about the way we manage environmental projects is we use environmental impact assessments, right? This is one of the ways we manage what's put in the ground and how the impacts are mitigated. And it's entirely discretionary. Now, almost since the ink was dry on the NRCA Act, which is 1991, the environmental groups have been saying there need to be some types of project that have a mandatory environmental impact assessment. And that has still not been done. Now, if that were to be done, if there was a list of, you know, 10 projects, 8 projects, I don't know, that, you know, could have very severe impacts to the environment, or perhaps projects taking place in specific places, you know, for instance, in protected areas, have to have EIAs, that would affect every development. It would be a change that would affect how we go about things. So those are the changes I am looking for in something like a manifesto, you know? So there's a commitment, there would be an explicit commitment to having mandatory EIAs for certain types of development, and also finally passing the regulations for the conduct of EIAs. That would make a difference across not 1, 2, 3, across all developments.
Just to add something to Diana's points about EIAs, one of the problems with EIAs is that each development is looked at as a separate individual development. So nobody is looking at the cumulative, that when we have one more hotel. Oh, it's just, this one is just going to be small. But what is a cumulative effect now? There needs to be, I talk about tough decisions. We're a small island. We have to make some decisions about what we're going to protect. And I'm in protected areas. There's a part of me that would like to protect every single tree, and but it is just not possible. So we have to make some tough decisions about where people live. We have to make decisions about what people are doing in certain areas. What happens when the spatial plan says that only housing should go in this location, or no housing in this location? What happens to the person who owns land there? How are they going to be addressed, compensated? And so these are the things that I hope will come out of going forward, because unfortunately the manifestos just seem to be, in general, the usual run-of-the-mill promises, throwing out the words, the phrases. And I think hopefully the people who can make these changes are listening to what is being said, because we've mentioned some key things that need to be implemented throughout the sector.
Right. Thanks for helping us to demystify that, because I think it's important for for people to understand, so that we can manage the expectations of what is realistic. We do know that we aren't necessarily for things in detail, because even already digest what has been presented, 100 odd pages, 60 odd pages within this time frame, it's kind of overwhelming. But as I said, I a lot of persons, not just myself included, there's some things, like you literally don't know, what does that mean, what are you saying? And and that's why we are also here having this discussion, because as part of it, we want to understand there are things where you can't afford detail in every section, but there are some things that we want to highlight, what can be more substantive. And when I look at, for example, the disaster response section, one bullet point under the JLP manifesto, I want to ask the opinion of the panel. The JLP will continue to upgrade and modernize the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, ODPEM, to comprehensively manage disasters and effectively undertake emergency management programs across Jamaica, and will continue to strengthen economic resilience to natural disasters through the Natural Disaster Contingency Framework. So reflecting on a point like that, would you say that encapsulates everything that we ought to consider as it relates to disaster response? Is there anything else that could be added to be more responsive, or we just have to work with what's there?
I wouldn't say any of that at all if I was devising the manifesto. What I would say is I would like to identify the vulnerable areas in Jamaica that are particularly vulnerable to climate-related disasters as one, but I would consider other types of vulnerability as well, and begin a program to either relocate people if that is the most appropriate thing, or improve resilience, things like moving people back from the sides of rivers, or restoring forests, restoring riparian zones. I think we should be looking at our vulnerabilities and not waiting until that storm is 70 miles away to say, oh, you know what, the whole Mona River, the whole Hope River Valley is going to wash away all the people living on its banks. I think we completely ignore these vulnerabilities, which are so in our face. We've gotten used to them and we turn away from them. So that would be my priority, not so much, various policy documents and so forth.
Great.
And I think, on that same front of, mitigating against disasters, that could be another avenue to look at the linkages between the effects of climate change and, for example, the economy. Jamaica depending heavily on the primary industries. A part of reducing or, reducing the effects of the external shocks, such as, increased storms and droughts and stuff like that, would be a shift in the economic production from primary industry center to more manufacturing, and then going into the tertiary and quaternary industries to kind of unshackle us from always being the primary, focusing on the primary industries. That I think is something that I was looking forward to in this in the manifestos that was not there. And as you know, as Pana said, it's always after the fact that, okay, this is coming, so we're going to do this after the fact, instead of trying to either change our behavior now for, like, for example, the economy and industries, or as we said, relocating people, and having a scheme that focuses on identifying not only the vulnerable areas but vulnerable sectors, and then how we can transition them to be more be stronger in how they react to the shocks, external shocks.
And then,
Thanks, Michael. I just wanna before Maria, Maria, you wanna come in, but just before you do, I just wanted to throw to the chat. I saw. Pardon?
No, I'm saying Abika was passing, so I couldn't hear you.
Okay. Nicole Brown made a contribution that it is important to make the connection between stronger ecosystems and resilience to disasters. And I think, as Diana would have acknowledged, that is very critical, of course. And we want to also reflect on not just, we saw there are a lot of controversies or environment conflicts that surfaced within this year or before, and there are some attempts to somewhat address that as well. The PMP speaking about reviewing existing beach licenses and awarding future licenses after community consultations. I'm not sure if somebody had brought that up before, but just wanted to know the opinions about the thoughts about that inclusion and future actions and policies that should follow suit in that regard.
So beach licenses are reviewed annually. They're an annual license, right? So to say you're going to review them annually is not to say very much at all. They do come up for renewal every year. What's needed with the beach licenses is probably an increase in fees. I haven't looked at it in a long time, but you know, the last time I did look at it, the fees were very low. There has been a beach policy which has been attempting to speak to this issue of access. You know, so what access rights are Jamaicans guaranteed to their own coastline? And it's been trying to settle that matter since, I think, about 2000, maybe 2002. So the sort of underlying policy positions that we need to take on beaches are really the problem, not so much the license that have been granted. Right. We have to decide what is it that we're really saying. Are we saying that, you know, every beach in Jamaica is open to the public, as it is in some Caribbean islands and many other parts of the world, even if that is for a fee? Or are we saying that, you know, that there are hotel beaches and other kinds of beaches that are only for their guests? What is actually the underlying policy position that we are going to come to? And what facilities are we going to provide to Jamaicans? At what cost or at no cost? And that is what needs to drive any review of beach licenses.
Right. Thank you for that response, Diana. I am just reflecting, and it reminds me of a scenario, you know, why you need a second marker when you're reviewing a paper, because you don't want to give people gold stars for things that should be there or is a given. So, and I think that underscores the purpose of having these kinds of conversation for us to really critique, you know, how robust these things are, and we don't really want people to be pulling the wool over our eyes. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that, or there's another point that you wanted to raise before. I know, Mario, you didn't get to reflect on the previous question, but I would want to move on to another interesting point under the PMP manifesto, which speaks to collaboration with local and international partners to ensure environmental sustainability as a centerpiece of all development. How do you weigh this statement against your track record, or even if you even want to compare against the current administration? What do you think about that? Does that make you say, woohoo, they're going to work with us? What does this mean?
Well, that comment sounds like a grand token, in my opinion. It sounds like it's being said to appease somebody. I'm not sure if it's working with anybody, but I'm not buying it. Because at the end of the day, how we tend to operate with these international partners is that they come and dictate to us what we should be focusing on, and not necessarily what's in our best interest. And that's a major problem, because they will want to put the development somewhere, or they will determine that this aspect of our natural environment is not worth as much as we think it is worth. but then we sort of ignore the whole cultural values of it and you know, the community value, the personal value of the resource. And I find that to be a problem. So without more on that point, I'm not prepared to accept it.
Okay.
Verbiage. That's all. Verbiage.
Michael,
Yeah,
thoughts
it's
on
just
that?
like it's a very it's like it's an intention. Like we would want to do this, you know, but it would be good to then know that okay, in engaging these international and local partners, these are the specific areas of intervention that we want to look to fulfill these specific goals, right? And you know, you're not necessarily looking for hundreds of pages of you know budgets and stuff like that, but just an intention to know okay, when we engage these partners, we're looking specifically to you know, develop this particular sector, and in that development also taking into consideration the people in the communities themselves who will be directly affected by whatever policies or programs that come from that international engagement.
Right, right. Okay, so I want to stick with the youth a little bit more, but within this discussion, I would also want to incorporate the feedback of everyone actually. But just starting out, Michael, you and I actually would have had the privilege of attending the first ever UN Youth Climate Conference in New York. That was last year. And I think, you know, for us and other young people who had the opportunity to participate, not just from Jamaica, but over, across the world, I think it brings us closer, not just to the geopolitical elements of climate change, but just that there is a space for us to be more serious, to be more active, but then there's an enabling environment and the support that needs to come from that. So when you're looking at the manifestos, both JLP and PMP manifestos, and things that speak to youth inclusion or don't speak to youth inclusion, how do you feel as a young person going forward that there is a space that's being carved out for young people to integrate themselves into sustainable development? Is there any encouragement within the manifestos there?
Yeah. So, you know, I just said we went to that summit and it was striking, especially as the Secretary General was a keynote listener, which was very, you know, heartening and, you know, encouraging. I think there are, you know, various structures locally, like the Youth Advisory Council, the Youth Parliamentarians, but I am yet to see any actionable changes. I went back to when the Youth Advisory Council was actually launched in 2016, and the Prime Minister mentioned that, you know, youth issues are important and they're going to be incorporated in the levels of policy making. What I want to know that, you know, young people are at the table in the ministries working in the policy units, and I want to see a young person's name on policy documents. I want to see them in the creation part of it. I want to see them in the implementation and evaluation part of the policies. Until we see that, then it's again just, you know, performative in some sense. But we have to acknowledge that there were some strides definitely made, but it's for more integration in substantive ways.
Okay, so just to change us, I'll adjust it a little bit as well. Going back to referencing the JLP manifesto. Somebody else can pull out the PMP. I don't want to be accused of sticking on one party. But yep. Under adaptation and mitigation, we will increase access to climate finance for both adaptation and mitigation work with ministries, departments, and agencies across government to provide guidance regarding more climate action initiatives and efforts. We will also strengthen the National Climate and Disaster Risk Management Framework using digital technology to monitor and collaborate with entities and encourage young people to take part in the effort to address climate change and disasters by using digital technology programs and activities. I want to see the money because when I go to these conferences, I'm sitting beside the youth and other, they are receiving impactful investments. I have a colleague in Nigeria who is now seeking funding to develop a space climb that is some satellite controlled device that's going to give real-time weather data to people in Africa. He's meeting Al Gore. They're getting him into the spaces to get the money. So it's a little vague for me. and the panelists can help me give that breakdown. I saw somewhere in another section of the manifesto where they did say about, you know, including unattached youth, but getting the rest of the young people to think about opportunities within the green space. How well do you think the manifestos are positioned to do that? Mario, do you have any a take on this?
Admittedly, I'm not very big on youth issues because I'm not exactly a youth. I kind of missed it, so I joined the party a little bit late. But I don't know, personally, I feel it to be lacking again when it comes to youth engagement. And Michael would have mentioned some pluses that he would have been a part of. He would have mentioned some as well. But again, I keep getting this impression of everything just being tokenistic, because when you look at youth parliament, when you look at the youth advisory boards, when you look at things like National Student Council body and all of those things, what impact do they have? What impact can they have in the context of how they are formed, or the environment within which they operate? And I have a problem with that because we don't see them. When Carl Samuda, Parliament dissolved, when Carl Samuda would have said what he said about the CXC exams, that cut me deep. I made the CXCs from like 2006, right? So I don't get the sense that they are really and truly interested in getting the youth involvement in national issues, because if they were, there would have been a clear strategy outlined where youth are involved at all stages of the developmental processes. So you consult them before the project starts. What are your ideas? What do you want to see? What, you know, get that representation, and every step through the process planning, they are consulted, they are engaged. I'm not necessarily one for involving let me just use youth at some levels of government, because there's a certain experience that youth will not have to contribute to certain discussions in the kinds of ways that they need to contribute. And that's a reality that we have to accept as young people. But at the same time, we know what we need. We are the experts in our lived realities. So you can tell us from the top what is it that we are experiencing at our level. So you have to engage us nonetheless.
True, but I want to challenge you, and I also challenge the other panelists. I don't want, and I think Eleanor mentioned, we don't need more youth councils. We need more. We need young people on every council, and I think it's the way how we think about youth engagement that's gonna keep us back and not create this enabling environment that we really thinking about, because we need to stop thinking about creating space for youth, like to have, like, I think about it like when you have an adult table and then you have a kiddie table. We don't need a national parliament.
We don't need that.
So to have youth involved in the project, it doesn't mean you create an exclusive club for young people. For example, I would, just as an example, me coming into the climate change space, I would have been given an opportunity to my expertise as a communication practitioner to serve in a climate project that provided this exposure, and then, you know, lay the foundation for passion. I don't think that when we talk about include the youth, it means to build something for young people, but there needs to be some sort of framework that's happening. So, you know, that's where you know, we want to explore. And I also want to acknowledge that there are other government agencies that have been doing incredible work with creating these opportunities for young people to transition as decision makers and to engage. We talk about the CCD, we talk about Jamaica JCDT, and also JET, bringing the kind of exposure that is now, you know, getting young people to think and align their careers, aspirations, and energies towards that. And I find it a little bit disappointing that both parties, from where I stand, in terms of the manifestos being reflected, I'm not seeing where you're trying to position young people to be more oriented in that space. I don't know if I'm being too impassioned right now, or do you think that it's being addressed in the manifesto? Suzanne, I want you to, Dr. Tuakan, I want you to weigh in on that.
I liked Eleanor's point earlier on, and coming back to it, I think is important, because the fact is that Jamaica is a young country. The vast majority of our people are youth. And the youth are the ones who are, and the children are going to be left with a lot of the problems that have been created by older people. I think we do have a problem I think it's really a global problem that we are stuck in doing things this way. This is how we have always done it. This is how the countries that make plenty of money have done it. And we do need change. And a lot of times it's young people who can use the new technology, who are not quite stuck in the box yet. So I do agree it's important to involve young people on the various committees in your organizations. I've seen the difference that young people have made in my organization. And I think it's very important particularly because we're talking about changing the way the status quo and the way things have always been done. Now that we realize the significance of our environment, the need to take better care of it, the need to address climate change, whether it's our fault or not. We do need to engage youth throughout, and it's not just in environment and climate change.
Right.
I want to say to the young people here, though, that I think there's too much waiting to be invited to the table and not enough militancy. And I have said this to some of you, in other conversations. Susan and I are not going to see the impacts of this disaster that's coming down to us. And you're all entirely too polite, right? I think you should not be waiting for these invitations. You should be organizing. That's what I don't see happening. I see involvement from youth. Yes, I see concern, but I don't see organizing. I don't see, any real momentum to there being a climate movement or an environmental movement in Jamaica. So I think if I could say one thing to you, it's that. Don't wait for them to invite you, right? Claim the space that is not just your right, but is absolutely necessary, because it is true that we cannot continue the way we have done in the past, and that you need to bring very forcibly to the people who have the power to make different decisions about how we go forward. So some militancy is needed, guys, some outspokenness, some willingness to really, take a risk. I mean, as somebody that has been an outspoken advocate, there are risks involved, but it's long past time that more of us are prepared to take them.
All right. Thank you so much, Diana. And we want to encourage more. I think I've been bad at monitoring the chat, but want to encourage more persons to see the questions and comments. I saw David Smith mention what's the strategy for adapting the effects of climate on tourism. Who pays, and is the industry expected to put money into maintaining coastal systems? I know I saw Diana feel some comments to that, but I don't know if any of the panelists want to take on any opinion or comments towards that was raised.
We spoke about climate and...
Oh, sorry, let me just regulate that. Sorry, Mario, you were saying something?
Yeah, I'm saying we spoke about climate and tourism at length in previous conversations we had earlier this year. And no, the manifestos, I've read both of them. They're quite long, so I may have missed a word or two. But neither of the two manifestos spoke about the impact of climate and tourism. In fact, they really didn't speak on the impact of climate on very many things in our country. But either way, they did not even consider things about tourism. So even if they never said the words climate change, they did not frame their ideas around tourism in such a way that would make it a resilient sector. Because we see what happened earlier when we had to shut down the borders. We near crashed, our economy near crashed because we couldn't get money that usually comes from tourism. But yet still, we have an opportunity locally, regionally, to kind of bolster that sector and make it a little bit more resilient to external shocks. But we totally, again, missed all of that in the manifestos.
I think just to put a point on the tourism thing, I think for tourism, Like, unfortunately, you know, tourism has been a major part of, you know, how we generate revenue. And I think we should, in diversifying, I was looking for, especially in the manifestos, more being said about how we're going to move away from only making tourism a centerpiece of our development and focusing on things like the creative industries, which will help us in, you know, as we're talking about embracing the digital revolution, and help us to market Jamaica in a new and fresh way. And that's another way that you will need to engage young people. I feel like, you know, digging our heels in on tourism is the wrong way to go, just because COVID-19 will stay with us for, you know, a very long time.
God, I thought you were gonna say forever.
You're seeing
Well, when
a
it's not
reduction in people.
COVID-19, it's going to be something else, guys. We have to get used to
something else, guys.
Yeah.
Yes, but a good point. And also, I think that we need to think out of the box with respect to tourism. I mean, I work mostly in rural communities, and their view of tourism is based on what they see depicted, which is, you know, sky-rise hotels. They find it very difficult to believe that anyone would want to come to their little community that, you know, doesn't have anything over one story, and that anyone would possibly want to live for a short time in a wooden house. So we do need to look far and wide, and I agree that we haven't focused on our creative industries, but I think that's one where a lot of older people don't get it.
Yeah.
Part of our challenge.
To be fair though, the PNP manifesto did speak about community based tourism, and they did mention the craft market playing a part of that and generating revenue. So they took it from that aspect. But then again, you sort of recognize the gaping hole that was left in that suggestion, because if we go on history, the kind of inclusion that communities will have in tourism is just a tour bus driving through, making a one-stop, probably listening to some.
And that's not what community tourism is.
That's really not it. So again, they missed it again. They missed it.
But you know, you have to look at what people do and not what they say, you know, and the PNP is out of office now, so we don't have their, you know, very recent actions. But we do have a JLP example of a 2,000 room hotel on the coast in Hanover in a very pristine mangrove area that the permits have been issued for. So I really discount, you know, the JLP's commitment or understanding even of the climate threat. We also have the case of the Montego Bay bypass, a road that is to go around Montego Bay. A bypass for Montego Bay is entirely needed because of the traffic problems. But the plan is to take it through another mangrove area. Now, keeping those mangrove areas intact is very important for climate resilience. And yet, when it comes down to it, when a decision has to be made about either, in this case, a road, or in the other case, a hotel, we go with the removal of the mangroves. And what we do is we say, oh, we're going to replant them in other areas. But even if that is successful, which it often is not, you will still lose the ecosystem functions of those mangroves for 20 or 30 years. Now, what happens when a storm comes through in the 20 or 30 years? So I look at not so much what is said from, you know, behind a microphone or in a policy document. I look at the decisions that are being made. And something I'd really encourage all of you to do, the decisions of the NRCA board are published on the NEPA website every month. And so you can just go there and look and see what have we decided to permit. Now, to a very great degree, it's too late, because at that stage, it's very hard to change the outcome. But at least it will give you a platform on which to say, no, hold on a minute. We say we're interested in climate change. We say we're interested in the environment, but we have just permitted whatever it is. So that's a very simple thing that everyone can do to try and build this organization and momentum around not just what we say, but what we do.
And on that note, it begs the question, which of the two manifestos gives more confidence regarding the management of climate change and environment issues? And I want to encourage not just the panelists, but I'd love to hear from other persons on the call through the chat feature. Let's feel free. I think that's part of the reason we're having this conversation, even for not us here, but these the issues that you just outlined, Diana, people who are in Montego Bay and other areas, when we understand, that should factor in our decision, if not entirely. So I don't know if anybody wants to take a stab at that question. Any other two manifestos, have you assessed it in that way, panelists?
Manifestos don't inspire me with a great deal of confidence. So they're not something that makes me think, oh, look at this wonderful rhetoric that is being written down, you know? Of the two administrations, and my experience, which is coming up for 30 years next year, has crossed both administrations with a longer time spent in the PNP. I think this particular JLP administration has made some strides. They have done some things that cannot be taken away. You know, the plastic ban, the styrofoam ban, finally declaring a protected area in Copper Country, even though the boundary is not where we would like it to be. So I do see some progress on the JLP side more recently, but there's still these very worrying things. Is road through Montego Bay is this administration. The giant 2,000-room hotel in Hanover is this administration. So I don't think we're anywhere close to where we need to be to taking, you know, either the climate crisis or protecting our natural resources seriously. Neither government has displayed that, in my opinion.
Okay. Dr. Otwokan, you have any thoughts on that?
No, I tend to agree, and it just goes back to that. And I'm not sure what the solution is, but the way I look at it is that most decision makers have this idea that we have all of these economic problems, and we don't even look at them, I don't think, as economic. We just look at them as financial. Oh, we need more money. Throw more money at this, throw more money at that. Get it from wherever, and that will fix the problem. I think, which is why I said that we need some changes in our approaches, because I think that we need to start looking at environmental problems and environmental challenges, climate change and so on, and social issues, and focus on those and focus on solving those problems. But it's how do you make money from those things? But I think if we put our heads to it, put our minds to it with creativity and using technology, there probably is a lot that could be done in terms of, you know, with resiliency, mangroves, coastal management. Maybe that's a way to employ people in taking better care of our environment and spending money in those sectors. And I feel that we would be surprised to see, I think we have a lot of emphasis on huge macroeconomic projects that are not necessarily even taking us where we presumably want to be in terms of improving our economy. And I do think that we need to look at our environment in a different way and have much more focus on fixing those environmental issues. And I think we'd be surprised to see where those would take us in terms of our bettering our economy.
All right, thank you. Michael, I'm going to ask you the same question. I mean, I know you're in the US, but I mean, the youth vote, I'm hearing for some, it's very important in this election. And it's interesting, the headspace of the young people and what will make them vote. Which of the two manifestos gives you more confidence regarding the management of climate change and environment issues?
Yeah. I mean, you know, I went in, you know, the GLP manifesto has, you know, more pages and more headings, the buzzwords again. But when you really look at it, they're, again, still intentions. And I think it's even with the PMP manifesto in terms of not, you know, the depth of appreciation for the cross-cutting impact of climate change and the environmental issues. I think in terms of young people, I do think that, unfortunately, the perception and you know, perception, style, and overall say, put togetherness is what I think drives a lot of voting behavior for especially young people right now. And that's just because, you know, there's not, you know, radical civic education in schools. There's not, you know, radical, for example, I think what youth groups should be focusing on is, you know, voter registration for young people, empowering them as voters to actually influence the power structures through elections. So yeah, I don't think either manifesto does it for me at all. Yeah, and we need, I think definitely, you know, as Dana said, in terms of the organizing, it's really on us to educate more young people and organize them in a more militant way the next time, so that the power in the youth cohort can actually translate to policy and electing representatives that actually care about the environment in a meaningful way.
Right. Mario, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah. So I'm on the same page with everybody in terms of how I feel about both manifestos.
Right.
It's just a case of the challenge I have with them is that one, both manifestos are written as if no one has any idea of what the reality is. And I expected a bit more from the GLP because they're in government, but the language sounds as if, you know, this is their first time at the rodeo. So I tend to agree more with Diana in terms of looking at what has been done over the years, but then I find myself still at a crossroads because with the PNP, they would have stuck to their intention from their 2011 manifesto to, you know, give more attention to climate change, and they established the Ministry of Land, Water, Environment, and Climate Change, and they did a few things, albeit ineffective, in my opinion. JLP came, moved that to the OPM, so it kind of, in my opinion, hid the entire climate and environmental agenda from the public, and that was a big no for me. But then when you look at the things like banning plastics and all of that, yes, it's good, but then I worry about what we're willing to accept as implementation, because then I thought that was a bit rushed. When you look at all the roadwork projects that are done, rushed again, because every time rain falls, the country's at a standstill. So you realize that really actually nobody cares enough to factor in the actual impacts of climate change into the day-to-day running of the country, the planning, the forward planning, none of that. So I'm flat.
Right. And it moves on to my next question, and I know that Susan had touched on it a little bit as it relates to the social and economic issues. How are the everyday social and economic issues linked to climate and the environment? How do we convey this to the public at large? Because we can discuss manifestos ad nauseum, and even though these manifestos have implications for everyone, but sometimes there are core sectors who I don't even think they look at the first page. So, you know, how does that factor into this kind of discussion and our intention in conveying, you know, these issues to the public at large? Diana, do you want to start?
Well, you know, I like to say that when I'm talking about environmental issues, I'm never speaking to anyone who's desperate, right? Because if I were not sure where my next meal was coming from, if I was living in very unsafe circumstances, if I didn't have money to send my children to school, you know, I would not be concerned about environmental issues. But it's a mistake not to realize that there's a lot of us who are not in those desperate circumstances, you know? And if we could convince those people, the people at the top, and people who, you know, have decent jobs and are really not looking for their next meal, I think you could see a radical change in the priority that is given to these matters. Now, I do agree we've had a framing problem, you know, and I guess I've been part of that. And you have to understand, you know, people who are concerned about the environment, they don't necessarily have the right tools and skills. You know, sometimes we're natural scientists, sometimes, you know, we're policy wonks, and that doesn't necessarily mean we can communicate well, or particularly now with social media and all of that. So in some cases, I don't think we've been very good at framing this message, and what's emerged is this idea that it's economic benefits versus the environment, like it's a fight between them, and you have to choose one of them. And who is going to choose the environment if you have to give up economic benefits? So I do think there's some work that needs to be done on reframing how these things are perceived. But I also think that there's a very urgent situation that more people than you think appreciate and are concerned about. And I take that from Nudity Up Jamaica, you know, which did have a great deal of success, I think, in reaching, in certainly being seen. I would not claim it changed behavior greatly, but I would say most people, if you ask them, have seen the campaign and stuff. And it had quite a bit of money behind it, you know. So I think it is possible to change minds and change behaviors if we're smart about it, and if it's properly funded, and if we really think about the messaging that we want to put forward.
Right. And so just throw into the chat. Thanks, Diana, for that. I'm just looking at the chat for any responses. Darnell O'Connor saying, I completely agree that the narrative can. Oh, he agrees. Darnell, we may want to have you speak in the Q&A segment on that stance. Agree that the narrative can be environment versus economics. You may want it to weigh in on that. Panelists, I'm throwing back to you to weigh in on the previous question.
Yeah, but I think it speaks to that issue that we keep coming back to, is that nobody seems to get that sustainable development is about balance, but it's always about, you know, well, we have to give up this and we have to give up that. But we might be giving up some things now for something better in the future, or to avoid us spending billions and billions of dollars to solve flooding in Kingston by doing something now. And I think that's the kind of leadership that we need from government, because you can't expect somebody who is, you know, in sort of desperate situation to make certain decisions. We need to address where we have conflicting policies over the same land space. And so those are the things. Maybe it's not possible for manifestos to really address these things, and maybe manifestos have just become, you know, documents that say the kind of things that, you know, people want to hear. But we do need to see some tough decisions and some thought about how we need to address the realities that we're facing as a nation.
Just to wedge it in, as you mentioned about the manifestos being the things that people would want to hear, I came across a very interesting discovery yesterday, you know, shared in around social media. A group of young people apparently created a sort of accountability website or platform which called the Andrometer. So apparently all the intentions from the 2016 manifestos, they have actually created this application that tracks it in terms of what has not been implemented, what has been implemented, what is ongoing, and and what has actually been broken or retracted on. So I think that's a step in the right direction, you know, and I think and I really hope definitely that it gets a lot of traction. And Diana just gave the young people a little drape up saying that we need to be more militant. So I think one of the first things that we need to help push the visibility of this kind of platform to show, you know, to respond to you, Susan, as well, that there's, you know, when we are now demonstrating more seriousness in demanding accountability, then I think people are going to buckle their shoes. So I think that's, if anything, an encouraging step in the right direction. Michael and Mario, do you have any thoughts? Starting with Michael, how do we convey this to the public? The connection between the social and the economic issues, it's evading a lot of us outside this space. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know, I've been thinking a lot about how to, as you know, creating content and doing marketing for some NGOs, and I feel like as humans we have a problem with delayed gratification, and it's hard for us to conceptualize climate change and its impacts, because it's such a, you know, the time scale is so large. I think that it goes back to, again, identifying where there are those impact points that even affect people who are in, lower socioeconomic strata, where the impacts of climate change on, environmental protection, not where the lack of environmental protection can directly affect them. And I think, the part about the Andrometer, for example, that's a good initiative. I would like to see, maybe some more partnerships directly with the National Secondary Students Council to actually get into the schools, and reach more young people in a more direct way, so that we can, get some organizing, as you said before, done to kind of figure out how we can localize the responses, to talk about, the rural residents, persons who are actually on the front lines of the issue. And that's just through community-based collaboration, again, to create the message, to really bridge the gap between more high-level, power brokers, technocrats, and then how it's actually reflected on the level with the people who are actually experiencing the impacts.
Okay, all right. So in the interest of time, because actually winding down, so if the panelists could just reflect on, as it relates to, should the JLP be returned to power? Should the PNP form the next government? If you can quickly think about what action or policy would you like to see towards responding to the climate crisis and promoting sustainable development? I definitely know. So I think maybe from your end, what is important, because I can't answer, that's not like a one summary, but what thoughts do you have around something you definitely like to see happen, regardless of which administration forms the next government? Mario, seeing that you are due to answer, I'd want you to start.
For me, it's the regulations that would govern the environment. So essentially, I need to see something concrete, as Diana would have said in her initial stages of the conversation, something concrete that outlines specifically how we move from project concept through to development. Where does the EIA come in? What type of projects require EIA? What should the EIA contain? Who are approved to the EIA? All of that. I want to see that on the table so we can have something to hold them accountable for when projects get passed.
Okay, thank you. Diana?
The place I stand and have stood for a long time is on the regulatory framework. I think we need a good regulatory framework, fines that are deterrent, proper sanctions. We need a good underlying policy planning framework so that we know where are the vulnerable areas that we are not going to allow development in, where are the parts of the coast that we have to perhaps step back from, where are we going to locate our vital infrastructure like airports and roads and so forth. It's the sort of whole underlying planning framework that I think will bring us the greatest benefits. Where are we going to have protected areas? And we have to be serious about if we're going to have a protected area. The current situation, guys, I don't know how many of you know this, but you can have a protected area, but there's nothing prohibited in there, right? A permit can be granted for a nuclear plant in a protected area. So we need underlying, structures that work, and that's where I have put a lot of work and would like to see more work done. And I have a little speech for you youngsters, right? So can I make it now? I'll make it as short.
It has to be quickly. I'm getting the wrap-up signal, so
it's short. One of the biggest successes I had came out of me being the only member of the public at a public meeting. And I won't go into all the details of it because of time, but just showing up at this public meeting, boring, created a very different outcome. So the actions that we need to take are sometimes not that difficult, but often quite boring. We just need to figure out what they are and do them.
Okay, so we don't need to troll people on Twitter just to say that we're being militant.
No, and you don't need a big, huge something, right? You just need to figure out the processes and be present at the process.
Right.
Your hand and say, no, hold on a little bit. What about climate change?
Right. Thank you so much, Diana.
Good point, Diana. And I want to just back up what Diana said about the regulatory and the planning, that is critical. We can't do everything in our little island.
Right.
And so to speak up about protected areas, which would be the other side, there are some spaces that I believe we need to leave and let nature be nature, because otherwise we're going to lose our water, we're going to lose our soil, and it's happening right now. We're going to lose the birds and bees, which we might not think are important, but they're critical for farmers. You cannot grow Blue Mountain coffee without the forests and the birds and the bees as the pollinators and the pest eaters. So we have to have the two together.
Thank you, Susan. Michael, 1 point.
Yes, 1 point.
Yes.
Definitely regulation, the sanction. I would want to see an administration have the political will to reach across the aisle and actually put a plan together that's cross administrations. That's my main point. I think
that
all
sounds like
those
you're
good
gonna have to
things-
come and run in the next right, for the next one. Okay, well, I think we've reached the end of the discussion. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm just gonna throw over to Aisha, who's gonna come back and give the wrap up. Aisha. You are on mute.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry that we have come to the point where we're literally rushing through, because there's so much that has been said that it would be lovely to reflect on and to unpack from the conversation. As we organize this, we kind of ask ourselves, why are we having this conversation? I think the points that have been raised here, the messages that have come out, underscores the value of having it. And so I hope that we're leaving it with a little bit more awareness of why it was relevant. Some of the key things I heard coming out: the importance of the historical antecedents, the importance of making the connections with what is happening on the ground, the lived experiences of people, and how that determines and dictates who can have the time and the energy to just take on these issues right now. We recognize that not everyone has a privilege to embrace and tackle these issues in the way that we like, but the responsibility certainly sits with our decision makers and leaders to make that time and to make those connections. We want to ensure that the work that is being carried out by the different agencies across Jamaica is making its way into policy and it's making its way into leadership decisions. And I think one of the main questions that we had coming to the conversation was, is that the case? And I've heard from all our panelists a resounding no. There's been a lot of conversation in our chat, a lot of key points about issues related to tourism, about reforestation, about road building and development, and how those everyday issues and our long-term bread and butter issues are linked to climate change and environmental sustenance. And so I want us to come away from this conversation a lot more inspired to troll whoever we need to troll. Sorry, Dan, going back to trolling. Whoever we need to troll ahead of that final debate on Saturday, and get one of these questions on the list that will be posed, get it posed at that level so that we can hear the responses from the persons vying to lead our country. I would say, again, one of my main takeaways and one of the things I'm most grateful for is to have seen leaders in this space, champions in this area, sitting at the table with youth activists and, the coming together of minds and ideas in a fashion so that I think we're stepping away from this with a great idea of how we can collaborate going forward to get these issues further embraced and integrated into planning. So thank you all very much. And again, we will go away trolling. Ayana, thank you for the challenge. And I want to say on behalf of my colleagues that we're going to take that on to be a lot more militant. I'm going to turn over to Eleanor.
All right, so I have about 30 seconds to thank everybody. So thank you, first of all, all of our speakers. Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Dr. Otukon. I hope I got the name right. Thank you to Dana Lynn, our moderator, for taking us through this evening. Aisha, a big thanks to you. I know you're on mommy duty, but thank you for getting all of us together to actually do something before elections to get this done. Thank you to everybody that attended for sharing with us. I see people from CCD here. I thank you, Ms. Gordon. Thank you, Leanne, for showing up and listening to us. We really do appreciate it. And I'm just going to remind you that we have to take this from just this conversation. We have to make action. This is part of our militancy, and we're on social media 24/7. We can send in a question, we can spam the page, we can email in your questions. We have to get
on the page.
We have to get at least one question on the debate. We have to introduce it into the conversation. that way we can hold them accountable for it. So thank you again so much for joining us. And yeah, I think that's it. Aisha?
One more thing, Emma had to leave, sorry everyone, and she mentioned that the JLP manifesto, the two birds flying are not Jamaican birds. It made BirdLife Jamaica quite angry, because even those things we need to get it right. We're talking about Jamaica. Let's reflect and be culturally relevant. Another consideration.
Thanks.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.